Good morning. You're looking live at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, where SpaceX is counting down to the first launch of the year. A Falcon 9 rocket is set to lift off at 9:56 a.m. Eastern Time, 14:56 UTC. With 114 small payloads on board, this mission is called Transporter 6. It is SpaceX's sixth dedicated small satellite rideshare mission. These 114 small payloads come from customers in 23 different countries. Again, liftoff is scheduled 55 minutes from now at 9:56 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 14:56 UTC. This Falcon 9 rocket is set to launch on the first of what could be as many as 100 SpaceX launches in 2023. This follows a record-setting 2022, where we saw 61 SpaceX launches, all successful, from the company's 3 active launch pads, 2 in Florida, 1 in California. This year, the launch pace is set to increase even more. There will be more rapid flights of Falcon 9 rockets. There are also 5 launches of SpaceX's Falcon Heavy rocket scheduled this year. And activity should pick up, we hope, down in South Texas at the Starbase facility, where SpaceX is developing the Starship rocket and the Super Heavy booster for its first orbital test flight sometime in the coming months, date to be determined. But SpaceX will get a quick start out of the gate, the third day of the year, with Transporter 6 set to launch at 9:56 a.m. Eastern Time, or 14:56 UTC. My name is Stephen Clark. I'm the editor of Spaceflight Now. Thanks for joining us for our live coverage of the Transporter 6 mission. If you're just joining us and you haven't done so, please hit the like button on our YouTube stream. That helps us gain a larger audience for our coverage. We want to bring this first launch of the year to as many people as possible. And to help us do that, we need a little help from you. You can do that by hitting the thumbs up or the like button here on our YouTube stream. We'd really appreciate that. Also, if you want to support our coverage, there are a couple of ways to do that as we launch into 2023. One way is to join our YouTube channel. We have membership tiers available for you to choose from. Depending on which level you select, you can gain access to exclusive members-only video features from our launch coverage. Also, you can contribute in the super chat here on our YouTube stream. That's another way to support our coverage, help us maintain and basically keep pace with this blistering launch cadence as we head into 2023, as well as expand our offerings and bring you more types of coverage down the road. The Falcon 9 rocket you're looking at out on pad 40 is powered by a first stage booster that is going for its 15th flight. Booster 1060 in SpaceX's fleet is on the pad this morning. Flight number 15 on tap. And that booster will be returning to landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station about 8.5 minutes after liftoff. The booster will be firing its 9 Merlin 1D engines for about 2 minutes and 16 seconds on the climb uphill this morning. Then it will shut down its engines and separate from the upper stage of the Falcon 9. And then it'll be firing cold gas thrusters to do a quick flip maneuver to essentially fly tail first. And it'll be reigniting 3 of those 9 engines for a boost back maneuver to begin canceling out its downrange velocity and heading back toward the Cape for a supersonic descent toward landing zone 1. That will be accompanied by twin sonic booms. So for those of you in the local area, be on the lookout for those dual sonic booms as this 15-story tall rocket booster makes its way back to land. Meanwhile, the Falcon 9's upper stage will be continuing downrange off the coast of Florida, heading south along the east coast of Florida, flying nearly directly over just off the coast of West Palm Beach, and then heading out over the Florida Straits, Cuba, and the Caribbean spacecraft through a sequence that will last more than 30 minutes, beginning about 58 minutes after launch. We'll see the first of those satellites separate, and then the last of the satellites will actually be deployed from the Falcon 9 rocket an hour and 31 minutes into the mission. We've just passed the T-minus 45-minute mark in this countdown. We're about 10 minutes away from the time at which SpaceX should begin loading propellants into the two-stage Falcon 9 rocket. That sequence is set to begin at T-minus 35 minutes with the loading of kerosene and liquid oxygen into both stages of the Falcon 9. In the minutes preceding that, we expect to hear confirmation from SpaceX's launch team on the outcome of the pre-launch readiness poll. That poll is, or should now be, underway. It's an electronic poll at the SpaceX Launch Control Center, just outside the gate to Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And during that poll, members of the SpaceX launch team will register their readiness, go or no go, to proceed into the terminal countdown and launch.
countdown polling is complete. We go for propellant load and launch.
And that was the voice from SpaceX Launch Control. Just a brief update there that the launch team has pulled go to proceed into the terminal countdown and launch. So go for propellant loading and go for launch of SpaceX's Transporter 6 mission this morning at 9:56 a.m. Eastern, 14:56 UTC.
Falcon 9 tanks are venting for the start of propellant load.
SpaceX's countdown now approaching T-minus 36 minutes, about a minute to go until the start of propellant loading. Again, if you're just joining us, you're looking at a live shot of Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, where SpaceX...
On abort instructions. For non-urgent no-go conditions, brief CE or LD and they will approve aborting the countdown. For urgent issues affecting the safety of the operation, operator shall call hold on the countdown net. Launch control abort the launch auto sequence immediately and proceed on the launch abort auto. And finally, at T-minus 10 seconds, launch control will be hands off and relying on automated abort criteria for the remainder of the count.
Launch auto sequence has started.
And there's the call from SpaceX Launch Control. The launch auto sequence has started. So control of the countdown is now in the hands of a ground computer, a ground launch sequencer computer that will oversee all the various checks and tasks over the next 30 plus minutes of the countdown. That ground launch sequencer computer, that ground computer will hand over to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computer at T-minus 60 seconds. So at T-minus 60 seconds, the Falcon 9 with its own computer will be in charge of the countdown and will be giving its commands to pressurize its propellant tanks and to ignite its 9 engines at T-minus 3 seconds. But right now, what's just begun is the loading of propellant into the Falcon 9, about 1 million pounds of super chilled or densified kerosene and liquid oxygen now flowing into the Falcon 9 rocket out on pad 40. This propellant loading will continue until about T-minus 2 minutes, just 2 minutes prior to launch. Those fill and drain valves will actually be closed and secured for flight. And at that point, the Falcon 9 will be fully loaded with its propellant supply. Again, liftoff of the Transporter 6 mission remains scheduled for 9:56 a.m. Eastern Time this morning from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. If you haven't had a chance to do so yet, please click the thumbs up or click the like button on our YouTube stream. That helps us gain a larger audience for our coverage. Now T-minus 29 minutes, 40 seconds until liftoff. We're starting to see some of the vapors appearing around the circumference of the airframe of the first stage booster out on pad 40. Those vapors come from the condensation of loading super cold liquid oxygen into that first stage. That liquid oxygen is chilled down to several hundred degrees below zero, very close, actually, to its freezing point. And the liquid oxygen chilled down to that cold, frigid temperature is actually known as densified liquid oxygen, or densified LOX, or LO2. And the loading of that super cold propellant actually causes some vapor and some frost to build up on the outside of that first stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. It's a little bit backlit since the launch is in the mid-morning hours this morning. The sun's out behind the rocket. From this perspective, you're looking from west to east. But if you look closely, you might be able to see some of the white frost building up on the outside of that liquid oxygen tank on the first stage of the Falcon 9. And throughout the remainder of the countdown, you can actually see that frost level rise up that first stage booster as the tank is filled over the next 25 minutes or so. Below that liquid oxygen tank on the first stage booster is the RP1 tank. That's the kerosene tank. RP1 stands for Rocket Propellant 1. It's a highly refined grade of kerosene fuel that feeds the 9 Merlin engines on the first stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. And while that's going on down on the first stage, kerosene fuel is also flowing into stage 2 at this time. That will be completed, actually. That'll be the first tank that's filled during the countdown at about T-minus 20 minutes or so. And then at T-minus 16 minutes, liquid oxygen will begin loading into the second stage. So 3 of the 4 propellant tanks currently are being loaded. While that's going on also, helium pressurant is loading into the high-pressure storage vessels on board the Falcon 9. That pressurant, that cryogenic helium, is used to maintain pressure in the propellant tanks as the fuel and oxidizer is consumed in flight. Now, 27 minutes, 10 seconds to go. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the payloads on this mission. As I mentioned a bit earlier, there are 114 small satellites on board this mission. 6 of those 114 satellites are actually what are known as orbital transfer vehicles. These are essentially space tugs that have some propulsive capability. So these will actually be deploying from the Falcon 9 rocket, from the stack on top of the Falcon 9 once it arrives into orbit. These 6 space tugs come from a variety of companies. 2 of them come from an Italian company called D-Orbit. One of them comes from a California-based company called Epic Aerospace. There's also a space tug from an Australian company called Skycraft. And here you're looking at 2 of the space tugs. On the right side of this slide, on the upper right, is the Orbiter SN1 space tug. That's from a company called Launcher based in Southern California. The SN1 space tug is Launcher's first orbital transfer vehicle, and it hosts a number of satellites for companies in the US, Italy, and other places around the world. Also hosts some payloads that stay attached to the space tug, including cremated remains for customers of a company called Beyond Burials, and also a phased array antenna that will test next generation communications technology for a company called Cesium Astro. This SN1 space tug actually has a propulsive capability. It will be deploying from the Falcon 9 rocket, and then it has thrusters, like the other space tugs I've mentioned, that will move the spacecraft out to a different orbit. It'll change its altitude, change its inclination, and these satellites, these orbiter transfer vehicles rather, actually serve as sort of like a last mile delivery system for small satellites that are too small to have their own effective propulsion systems. On the lower right is another space tug from a company called Momentous Space. This is the Vigoride 5 orbiter service vehicle, as it's known, the Vigoride 5 OSV. And here you see that orbiter transfer vehicle undergoing a solar array deployment test. This is the second flight of Momentous Space's Vigoride fleet. This Vigoride 5 orbiter transfer vehicle also carries small satellites on board, one small satellite on board for a customer in Singapore, and the other payload on the Vigoride 5 transfer vehicle is actually a space-based solar power experiment that was developed by scientists at Caltech. On the left, so we've seen on the right some of the larger vehicles on this rocket. On the left, you see one of the smaller spacecraft that's counted among those 114 satellites, just the size of essentially a soda can. You can see there for scale, it's sandwiched between the hands of that technician from a company based in Argentina called Innova Space. Those satellites from Innova Space are actually stowed on the launcher orbiter SN1 transfer vehicle for today's launch. So this mission, as I mentioned up front, is called Transporter 6. 114 microsatellites, nanosatellites, picosatellites, and orbiter transfer vehicles on board the Falcon 9 rocket. Of those 114 satellites, they come from operators in 23 different countries. And this is SpaceX's 6th transporter-class small satellite rideshare mission since 2021. This is a regular feature in SpaceX's launch schedule. They launched 3 transporter missions last year. There are also a few of those transporter missions booked up for 2023 on Falcon 9 rockets as well. SpaceX charges about $1.2 million for 200 kilograms or about 440 pounds of upmass on one of these transporter missions. And that may sound like a lot, but that is actually one of the lowest, actually the lowest price point in the satellite launch market for 200-pound class type payload. For comparison, Rocket Lab, which launches dedicated rides on its small Electron rocket for satellites weighing up to 150 to 200 kilograms, one of those dedicated rides goes for about $7 to $8 million on the commercial market. So a much lower cost for SpaceX's transporter missions. However, the flip side of that is the transporter missions are like a bus. They go to a certain orbit, and that's where they deploy all the satellites. Whereas if you buy an Electron or another dedicated ride, you can make demands of the launch provider essentially, because you can set the altitude and inclination for your launch to go exactly where you want your payload to go. So that's the kind of the market situation with small satellite launch, and SpaceX's transporter series of missions will continue today with Transporter 6. Also on board this mission are 36 SuperDove Earth imaging satellites for a company called Planet, based in San Francisco. These SuperDove satellites are based on CubeSats, but they have very advanced optical payloads on board. On the upper right is one of these SuperDove satellites. It's about the size of a toaster oven. When it's stowed up, it deploys solar arrays and opens an aperture door for its camera once it arrives in orbit. And some representative sample images from other SuperDove satellites here. On the left is a photo of Bermuda from a SuperDove in orbit. And on the lower right are lava flows taken just last month of the eruption of the Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii. Now, 20 minutes, 50 seconds until launch. The next major event we expect to see will be the so-called big vent from the Strongback out at Pad 40. We'll see a plume of gaseous oxygen venting from the Strongback in a few moments as SpaceX moves on to the next phase of propellant loading this morning. And there we see the big vent from the Strongback. This event coincides with the completion of loading of kerosene fuel on the second stage and the beginning of the chill down or thermal conditioning of the liquid oxygen loading line that leads up the Strongback into stage 2. That thermal conditioning will last a few minutes to make sure those lines are properly chilled in for loading of liquid oxygen into the second stage, which begins at T-minus 16 minutes.
Stage 2 fuel load is complete.
Today, we're also receiving video from Pete Carstens of Max Q Productions with his telescopic tracking camera at Kennedy Space Center, looking out toward Pad 40 this morning at that big vent from the Strongback. He'll be helping us track the Falcon 9 as it makes its way to space this morning. Again, if you're just joining us, you're looking at live shots of Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, where SpaceX is counting down to liftoff of a Falcon 9 rocket in 18.5 minutes. This mission is set to deploy 114 small satellites into orbit. This will be the first of as many as 100, potentially, SpaceX launches in 2023. My name is Stephen Clark. I'm the editor of Spaceflight Now. Thanks for joining us for our launch coverage this morning. If you haven't done so yet, please hit the like button on our YouTube stream. That helps us gain a larger audience for our coverage. We want to bring this launch to as many people as possible. And if you haven't done so, please click the thumbs up or the like button. That really helps us a lot. Also, if you want to support our coverage of the launch activity at Cape Canaveral and around the world, you can join our YouTube channel. Depending on which level or membership tier you select, you can gain access to members-only bonus video features and footage, and you'll be supporting our coverage as well.
Stage 2 LOX load has started.
And there's the call from SpaceX Launch Control. The next phase of the countdown now beginning. That confirmation is that loading of liquid oxygen is now underway onto stage 2 of the Falcon 9 rocket. This is the last of the 4 propellant tanks to be filled this morning. We're now seeing one of the Coast Guard helicopters making its survey of the launch area at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station this morning. This is a normal sight on launch days at Cape Canaveral as the military forces work to ensure that all of the restricted waters under the Falcon 9's flight path are clear of all ships, and they want to also make sure that the airspace around the launch area is also clear before proceeding with this launch this morning. Coast Guard works in concert with the U.S. Space Force, as well as some Navy assets to ensure that the waters and airspace are all clear for launch. T-minus 10 minutes, 45 seconds and counting. This mission will be targeting a polar sun-synchronous orbit. So after liftoff, the Falcon 9 will be heading initially out to the southeast from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station to clear the coast. And then soon after, the first stage separates about 2.5 minutes into the flight to begin its return to landing zone 1 at the Cape. The second stage will begin what's known as a dogleg maneuver. This uses vector thrust from that second stage engine to steer the rocket. Actually, we'll be making a right-hand turn as it heads down range, flying parallel to the east coast of Florida, just off the coast of West Palm Beach and Miami, heading out over the Florida Straits, Cuba, and the Caribbean Sea, and then ultimately over Central America and the Pacific Ocean on its first orbit of the Earth. The rocket will be heading farther downrange over Antarctica and then be heading north over the Indian Ocean for the final burn of the mission with its second stage restart and then deployment of the 114 payloads on board. So again, this is a southerly launch. It'll be taking the southerly polar orbit corridor from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. on 7 minutes before liftoff at T-minus 7 minutes. One of the next major milestones is scheduled to begin. That will be the thermal conditioning or chill down of the 9 Merlin engines on the bottom of the first stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. This involves flowing a small amount of super cold liquid oxygen through those engines to prepare them and condition them for ignition.
Engine chill has started.
That call from SpaceX Launch Control confirms that engine chill has started. So that chill down or thermal conditioning of the first stage propulsion system now underway. One of the next big milestones will be coming up in less than a minute with the completion of kerosene or RP1 loading on the first stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. We hope to hear that call in the next few moments.
Stage 1 fuel load is complete.
Did hear that call from SpaceX Launch Control. Stage 1 fuel load is now complete. Stage 2 fuel load was completed about 15 minutes ago. So at this point, the kerosene tanks on both stages are fully loaded with rocket-grade RP1 kerosene fuel. About 46,000 gallons of that fuel has been loaded into the vehicle. Liquid oxygen loading continues for a few more minutes. Loading of super cold oxidizer on the first and second stages will be terminated at about T-minus 2 minutes. One of the next things we'll be looking for is the retraction of the strong back from the rocket out at pad 40.
Falcon 9 tanks are pressurizing for strong back retract.
That strong back retract will be getting underway shortly. That structure will be moved about 1.5 degrees from the Falcon 9 rocket. Here's a look ahead at some of the major milestones in today's mission. We've talked about the first stage burning for about 2 minutes and 17 seconds actually on this mission, followed by stage separation. That first stage will return to the Cape for landing, while the upper stage continues downrange to the south for a 6-minute orbit insertion burn. Landing of the first stage expected at landing zone 1 at the Cape, 8.5 minutes after launch, about the same time as that upper stage actually achieves orbital velocity. A second burn by the upper stage is planned about 55 minutes into the flight. That'll set the stage for the 33-minute sequence to deploy the 114 small satellites from the Falcon 9, beginning at T plus 58 minutes. That will end at T plus 91 minutes to complete today's launch sequence. Here's a look at the target orbit, 326 miles, 525 kilometers at an inclination of 97.5 degrees. And here's a look at the flight history of this booster. Booster 1060 will be going for its 15th flight today. It debuted back on June the 30th of 2020 with the launch of a GPS satellite. It has flown 14 times to date, most recently back on October the 8th with Intelsat's Galaxy 33 and 34 satellites going for its 15th flight today. Booster 1060 set for liftoff in less than 3 minutes. Second stage liquid oxygen loading is now complete. So SpaceX has a fully loaded Falcon 9 out on pad 40, a minute and a half to go until launch of the Transporter 6 mission. Everything looking good at this point in the countdown. At this point, the autonomous flight termination system on the Falcon 9 should be activated and checked out for flight. And coming up at T-minus 60 seconds, the Falcon 9's onboard computer will take command of the countdown. T-minus 30 seconds. We heard the final go for launch from SpaceX's launch director. Everything looking good so far in the countdown, 20 seconds to go. Engine ignition will be occurring at T-minus 3 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Standing by for ignition. There's ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket with 114 small satellites, customers in 23 countries. T plus 20 seconds. Falcon 9 now pitching on a trajectory to the southeast from pad 40. 30 seconds into the flight. Now seeing some zoomed in tracker views from Pete Carstens of Max Q Productions as the Falcon 9 approaches the speed of sound. 50 seconds into this mission. T plus 1 minute. Falcon 9 now supersonic. Seeing that contrail develop in the wake of the Falcon 9 rocket as it traverses the stratosphere. 90 seconds into the flight. No problems reported from SpaceX Launch Control so far on this first launch of the year. Really spectacular views now from Pete Carstens and his long-range tracker at Kennedy Space Center, 2 minutes into the flight. Coming up on main engine cutoff in just a few moments. There's main engine cutoff, standing by for stage separation. And we have stage separation, first stage and second stage now flying on their independent trajectories. Ignition of the second stage has been confirmed visually. And there's ignition of the first stage for the boost back burn. 3 engines firing to reverse the course of the first stage. It'll be zeroing out its velocity and heading back toward landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, just about 6 miles or 10 kilometers from the pad that the Falcon 9 lifted off from 3 minutes ago. Great tracker view here of that first stage completing its boost back burn. We're going to hold that until that burn is complete. And there is cutoff, boost back burn cutoff. And you're seeing the plume from the cold gas nitrogen thrusters firing. Those thrusters are actually controlling the orientation of the booster stage. It's actually in space above 100 kilometers now, above the von Karman line. And in that airless vacuum, you need those thrusters to control the attitude of that booster. It does have grid fins that have extended from the booster to help it with stability as it dips back into the atmosphere in the next few minutes. Just had confirmation of fairing separation on the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. We're switching over to SpaceX now. This SpaceX feed does come with about 20 seconds or so of latency or delay. There's a bit of a lag in the video from these onboard cameras. You can see the velocity on the lower right heading up. That's the velocity of the upper stage, passing 7,800 kilometers per hour at an altitude of 183 kilometers now. It's about 120 miles or so. On the lower left, you can see the velocity of the booster also increasing as it falls back to Earth at 144 kilometers altitude now. It's reached its apogee, the apex of its trajectory this morning. You can see the Florida coastline down below, some scattered cloud cover there. Looking down 140 kilometers straight down the chute toward Florida's east coast. Those grid fins having deployed now, as I mentioned a few moments ago. You can see two of those there. Those are titanium grid fins used for aerodynamic stability. You're now seeing part of the Cape come into view in the lower right in this onboard camera view from the first stage booster. Again, on the left, the first stage, on the right, the upper stage, and these views from SpaceX. 5.5 minutes, a little more than 5.5 minutes into the flight now. Great shot of the Cape coming into view there from the onboard camera. Going to switch over to the tracker from Kennedy Space Center now, which continues to show the first stage booster firing its cold gas thrusters. As we saw in the onboard view, this is the ground-based view looking up towards space. That booster now traveling 3,500 kilometers per hour, just past below 100 kilometers altitude. Coming up in about 20 seconds will be the entry burn. Less than 15 seconds now until the expected entry burn. There it is, entry burn startup. 3 engines firing on the first stage to slow it down for reentry. This is a retro rocket burn that's going to last about 20 seconds. Should be cutting off shortly. And there's entry burn cutoff. Spectacular views of the first stage booster. That booster is 15 stories in height, coming back to Earth now, passing below 1,200 miles an hour now. Heading toward the sun. Again, the sun's off in the southeastern sky. Same direction as the rocket now from this tracker. About a minute, less than a minute remaining until landing of the first stage booster. And there's the landing burn. Single engine now firing for the final braking maneuver to slow the rocket down for landing, heading to landing zone 1. Rocket just passing beyond the trees from our camera site at Kennedy Space Center. We're now switching over to SpaceX, which has a camera much closer to the landing zone. Again, this comes with a bit of a lag. So we're going to stand by for visual confirmation of touchdown. Booster 1060 on the deck at landing zone 1. 15 flights now in the book for this booster, tying SpaceX's record in its fleet of reusable first stage boosters. Again, this landing occurring 8.5 minutes after launch at landing zone 1, about 6 miles south of pad 40 where the mission began. Also heard confirmation from SpaceX that the upper stage has arrived in orbit. So the 114 payloads that comprise the Transporter 6 mission now in a parking orbit at an altitude of 207 kilometers. It's about 120 miles. We're seeing some views now from the upper stage. You just saw a view of the stack of payloads that will be deployed later this morning. The upper stage now passing east of Honduras and Nicaragua over the Caribbean Ocean. They'll be passing over the Central America region and then out over the Pacific in the next few minutes. Now in orbit. So a good start to SpaceX's first launch of 2023. However, still some milestones to go, with another burn of the upper stage coming up at T plus 55 minutes, as well as the 33-minute long deployment sequence to allow the Falcon 9 upper stage to cast free these 114 payloads. SpaceX's Transporter 6 mission is now passing the 21-minute mark, about 34 minutes remaining in this coast period. This tracking map coming from SpaceX shows the current location of the second stage with its 114 payloads in tow over the Pacific Ocean west of Chile, heading southbound toward Antarctica. It'll make a swing over the South Pole region and then head back north over the Indian Ocean before reigniting its main engine for just a very brief 2-second burn at T plus 55 minutes or so. That burn will nudge the payloads, reshape the orbit into a more circular orbit around the Earth, and that will position those satellites into the proper altitude and the proper inclination for separation. The satellites will be separating mostly one at a time over the course of about 33 minutes, beginning at T plus 58 minutes.
Acquisition of signal, reef. Acquisition of signal, Maldives.
SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket is just passing within tracking range of a downrange ground station in the Maldives. The rocket has flown over Antarctica and is now heading north over the Indian Ocean, preparing for a restart of the upper stage engine coming up at 55 minutes and 20 seconds. This burn will last just 2 seconds, a very short burst of energy from the upper stage engine to circularize the rocket's orbit and reach the proper altitude and proper inclination for the deployment of the 114 spacecraft that the rocket is carrying this morning. We hope to see some video of that burn. We'll see if we get that relayed to us by SpaceX. Here's some video from the upper stage, standing by for ignition. And there's ignition. Very brief burn, and the burn is complete. We'll stand by for confirmation from SpaceX on
nominal orbit insertion.
We just heard the call, nominal orbit insertion. That's what I was waiting for, confirming that the Falcon 9 has achieved the expected and proper orbital parameters this morning. Again, the target this morning was a near circular orbit at an altitude of about 525 kilometers or 326 miles and an inclination of 97.5 degrees. That makes it a polar sun-synchronous orbit. It's an orbit that's highly favored by many types of missions, including Earth observation missions for global coverage, as well as communications missions that also enable global coverage from low Earth orbit. And in about 2 minutes, we expect to hear some calls from SpaceX Launch Control to verify the beginning and to confirm the beginning of the deployment sequence for these Transporter 6 payloads.
Acquisition of signal, Bangalore.
Wait, Sat-1, separation confirmed. DD Sat-2, separation confirmed.
And we're hearing calls from SpaceX Launch Control that the deployment sequence has begun. First two satellites deployed
separation confirmed.
were Kuwait Sat 1 and BD-Sat 2 from Kuwait and the Czech Republic. These are small CubeSats. We also heard a call that
Taha 01, separation confirmed.
2 satellites have now deployed for Spire Global. These are CubeSats for Spire's weather data collection and ship tracking network.
Connected T1.2, separation confirmed. Gamma Alpha, separation confirmed. Bro 8, separation confirmed.
We're hearing more confirmations of payload deployments from SpaceX.
Newt, separation confirmed.
These latest payloads include
Higgins, separation confirmed.
Connect T1.2 from Turkey, Gamma Alpha, a solar sail demo
separation confirmed.
mission from France. Bro 8 is a maritime tracking satellite from France.
Starvibe, separation confirmed.
The Newt satellite deployed moments ago. It's from Spain. The Huygens satellite is a military satellite, part of a duo of satellites from Norway and the Netherlands. And Starvibe, we just heard the confirmation of that deployment. That's a payload, a CubeSat from Poland,
Lemur
testing
2,
out optical
Steve Albers,
sensors.
separation confirmed.
And we've heard confirmation of 2 more Lemur 2 satellites. These are the CubeSats from Spire Global for their ship tracking and weather data collection constellation.
ISI launch Cleos KSF3A, separation confirmed.
And the first of 4 satellites for Cleos on this mission. That's a company based in Luxembourg that does radio frequency characterization work with satellites. The first of 4 Cleos satellites have deployed.
Birkeland, separation confirmed.
Birkeland is the companion to the Huygens satellite.
Space B-156-167, separation confirmed.
Those 2 satellites are a joint military, part of a joint military project between Norway and the Netherlands. And then the Space B satellites that we just heard are Internet of Things, low data rate communication satellites that are the size, there are 12 of these, each of the size of the slice of bread, that are now deploying from the Falcon 9 for swarm technologies.
Expected loss of signal, reef.
Lemur 2 and Molo, separation confirmed. ISI launch Cleos KSF3B, separation confirmed.
Another Lemur 2 satellite for Spire Global has been cast free from the Falcon 9, as well as the second of 4 Cleos RF frequency characterization satellites, radio frequency characterization satellites, has now separated. Now about 5 minutes into this 33-minute sequence to deploy all payloads from the Falcon 9.
ISI launch Cleos KSF3C, separation confirmed.
And there's the third of 4 Cleos RF characterization and geolocation satellites now deployed.
Lemur 2 Filari, separation confirmed.
Another Spire Global Lemur 2 satellite has deployed. I believe that is the 6th and final Spire satellite on this mission.
ISI launch Cleos KSF3D, separation confirmed. Flock 4Y, separation confirmed.
And now the 4th and final Cleos
losses.
RF satellite has
Space
deployed.
BD ISI launch Poly 10 from Kyiv, separation confirmed. Flock 4Y, separation confirmed. Guardian Alpha, separation confirmed. Flock 4Y, separation confirmed.
Additional satellites now deploying, including a CubeSat
Flock 4Y,
from
separation confirmed.
Ukraine. And now we're into the deployment of
Space
36.
BD Sony Sphere 1, separation confirmed.
We're into the deployment of now of 36 SuperDove satellites for Planet
ISI
that
launch Clyde Space NSL Sat 2, separation confirmed.
we talked about those a little bit earlier in the launch coverage. 36 SuperDove Earth imaging satellites for Planet now being deployed, and one at a time. We've also heard confirmation of deployment of the Sony Sphere 1 satellite. That's a satellite from Sony, a CubeSat from Japan, as well as the NSL Sat 2 high data rate communications tech demo satellite for a company called NSLCom in Israel.
ISI launch Sternula 1, separation confirmed. Flock 4Y, separation confirmed. Flock 4Y, separation confirmed. Flock 4Y, separation confirmed.
So these Flock 4Y separation events are all these SuperDove remote sensing satellites for Planet. There are 36 on board, 36 individual separation events. So that's what will be separating exclusively over the next 12 minutes or so. These satellites will deploy one at a time, and then once all 36 are released from the rocket, the Falcon 9 will move on to deploying some additional payloads. Some of the larger payloads, some of the largest payloads on this mission will actually be deployed last in this sequence.
Flock 4Y, separation confirmed.
Expected loss of signal, Bangalore.
I believe the Falcon 9 has passed outside the range of a tracking station. So we're not hearing any real-time confirmation of any of these deployment events that should be ongoing right now. We'll stand by for the next acquisition of signal from the Falcon 9 rocket. That should be occurring in a few minutes, perhaps over the Svalbard ground station in the Arctic.
Acquisition of signal, Svalbard.
Separation of 20 payloads confirmed.
And the Falcon 9 rocket is now back in range of the Svalbard ground station. That's on an island in the Arctic Ocean. And during that interval, with no ground station coverage, 20 payloads were deployed according to SpaceX. Now 1 hour, 16 minutes, 43 seconds into this Transporter 6 mission. At this point,
Block 4Y, separation confirmed.
the Falcon 9 should be finishing up the last few batches of Super Dove satellites, these Flock 4Y
Block
remote
4Y,
sensing
separation confirmed.
satellites from Planet. They will continue deploying for another couple of minutes. And then the rocket will move on to other payloads.
Flock 4Y, separation confirmed. Flock 4Y, separation confirmed. Block 4Y, separation confirmed. Flock 4Y, separation confirmed.
Link Tower 3, separation confirmed. Albania 1, separation confirmed. Link Tower 4, separation confirmed.
So the 36 Flock 4Y Super Dove satellites for Planet have deployed. And now the Falcon 9 has moved on to the final phase of the payload separation sequence. 2 satellites, 2 microsatellites for Link Global, a Virginia-based company that's attempting to connect cell phones to orbiting satellites, have deployed, as well as an Earth observation satellite called
5, separation confirmed.
Called Albania 1. That's a satellite owned by the Uruguayan company Satellogic that has been leased to Albania's government. And now YAM-5,
Acquisition signal, POGO.
a condosat hosting multiple commercial customer payloads and tech demos, has now deployed as well. That's a satellite owned by a company called Loft Orbital.
NewSat 34, separation confirmed. Albania 2, separation confirmed.
More satellites now deploying from the Falcon 9 rocket. For confirmation of NewSat 34 and Albania 2. NewSat 34 is a commercial Earth imaging satellite for Satellogic and microsatellite. Albania 2 is also owned by Satellogic, but it's the second of two Satellogic spacecraft on this launch that is being leased to the government of Albania to watch over Albanian territory. A minute, 22 minutes into the flight, hour, 22 minutes into the flight now. About 9 minutes remaining in this payload deployment sequence.
First ISI satellite, separation confirmed.
The first of 3 ISI radar remote sensing satellites has deployed. ISI is a company based in Finland, specializes in building and operating microsatellites, weighing less than 100 kilograms each, with high-power radar systems. And there's confirmation of the second of 3
separation confirmed.
ISI satellites that have deployed.
Sat 35, separation confirmed.
For confirmation of separation of a Umbra satellite. This is for the company Umbra, based in Santa Barbara, California.
Ion SCV 007, Glorious Gratia, separation confirmed.
Which is also a radar remote sensing company of the ilk of ISI, similar to ISI, but a US-based company with a radar remote sensing capability. Their satellite has deployed. We also heard confirmation of NewSat 35. That's the 4th and final NewSat Earth observation satellite for Satellogic that is deployed on this Transporter 6 mission. And then most recently, we heard confirmation of separation of an orbiter transfer vehicle called Ion Glorious Gratia for the Italian company D-Orbit that is also separated from the Falcon 9 rocket. They have an additional second orbital transfer vehicle called Fierce Franciscus that'll be separating in a few moments. These satellites actually host experiments and payloads. These orbital transfer vehicles can change their orbit, adjust their altitude and inclination to reach different orbits than the Falcon 9
Ion
is,
SCV-008 Pierce Franciscus, separation confirmed.
is releasing these satellites into. We just heard confirmation now, the second of two deorbit
Launcher
Ion
for SN1 Space Tug, separation confirmed.
satellite carriers has separated, and then another orbital transfer vehicle for the company Launcher, based in Southern California. This is their Orbiter SN1 tug, has now deployed as well. That payload, that transfer vehicle also has propulsive capability and will be deploying several small satellites for companies based in the US, Italy, and Argentina in the coming weeks. So just a few more payloads to go now before this Transporter 6 mission wraps up.
Second ISI satellite, separation confirmed. Skycraft, separation confirmed.
Another ISI satellite has deployed, as well as an orbital transfer vehicle developed by the Australian company Skycraft. This Skycraft transfer vehicle, has 4 of Skycraft's own satellites on board. These satellites will assist in air traffic control management. The satellites are part of a planned 210 satellite constellation that Skycraft is planning to deploy to fill gaps.
5, separation confirmed.
To fill gaps in air traffic control, the pilot communications coverage, especially over the oceans. The most recent payload deployment we've heard is the Vigoride 5 transfer vehicle from a company called Momentous Space. This Vigoride 5 will test a water-based plasma propulsion system and will deploy a small CubeSat from Singapore and hosts a payload that will experiment in space-based solar power technology. That payload comes from Caltech.
Chimera Leo 1, separation confirmed.
And the orbital transfer vehicle from Epic Aerospace, called Chimera Leo 1, has now deployed. This is Epic Aerospace's first orbital transfer vehicle. Again, these transfer vehicles are designed to be able to adjust their orbits. They can change their altitude and inclination and deliver small payloads into more precise, more specific orbits than the standard 525-kilometer sun-synchronous orbit that the Falcon 9 launched into this morning. So these orbital transfer vehicles, or space tugs, essentially act as a last-mile delivery system for small satellites that are too small to host an effective propulsion system of their own. One more satellite still to go, if we've tallied our payloads correctly. That is the EOS Sat-1 mission. That's one of the larger satellites on this mission. It's about a 400-pound spacecraft, about 180 kilograms, from a company called EOS Data Analytics, based in Silicon Valley. EOS Sat-1 will collect optical images of the Earth with an emphasis on surveying crops and agricultural fields.
Dragonfly Aerospace, EOS Sat-1, separation confirmed.
And there's separation of EOS Sat-1, built by Dragonfly Aerospace in South Africa, owned by a company called EOS Data Analytics, based here in the United States. We're now 1 hour, 33 minutes into the Transporter 6 mission. SpaceX says they were able to confirm most of the payload deployments that were planned during this 33-minute deployment sequence. Some of those deployments still yet to be confirmed when the rocket passes back within ground station coverage. SpaceX is ending their live video coverage of this mission at this point. They are expected to provide an update to us on social media once they confirm those final deployment events. We'll pass that along to you on our website, spaceflightnow.com, when we receive that information. And with that, we're going to conclude our live coverage of the Transporter 6 mission in a few moments. But before we do, we want to bring you an updated look at our launch schedule for January. This is not an all-inclusive list. These are just the next 4 missions that we have confirmed dates or timeframes for from various sources. The next SpaceX launch will be on Sunday night, January the 8th, from Pad 40 once again at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. That mission will be carrying 40 internet satellites into orbit for OneWeb, another polar orbit mission on tap Sunday night. That launch is timed for roughly 11:45 p.m. Eastern Time Sunday night. That's 4:45 a.m. UTC on Monday, January the 9th. These dates here we have are in local time, Eastern Time in the U.S. Later next week on January the 12th, SpaceX plans to launch their 5th flight of a Falcon Heavy rocket from Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center. This mission will be deploying 2 payloads into geosynchronous orbit for the U.S. Space Force, a military communications satellite and a satellite for the Space Force that hosts a variety of tech demo experiments. So 2 payloads on board the Falcon Heavy rocket. The 2 side boosters on this mission will be returning to landing zones 1 and 2 at Cape Canaveral. So we'll see dual booster landings of those 2 side boosters about 8 or 9 minutes after liftoff. The core stage will be expended, will not be recovered out in the Atlantic Ocean. Here's a live shot here of Pad 39A, where SpaceX teams are undergoing preparations to prepare and reconfigure the strong bag and transporter erector and reaction frame structures for the triple core configuration of the Falcon Heavy after a few Falcon 9s flew off that pad in recent weeks. Later in January, January the 18th, SpaceX will have another Falcon 9 launch that'll be carrying the GPS SV-06 mission and navigation satellite for the U.S. military from Pad 40. And then later in January, SpaceX plans another Falcon 9 launch with a commercial high data rate, high throughput communications satellite called Amazon Nexus. This Amazonas Nexus satellite is for a Spanish company called Hispasat. That launch is also expected to originate from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We do also anticipate at least one, perhaps more than one, Starlink mission before the end of the month from the Cape by SpaceX. So we're looking at a month of January with at least 6, perhaps more, missions from Cape Canaveral planned by SpaceX. Again, a busy start to 2023. SpaceX is planning up to 100 missions this year, they've said. And the Eastern Range, the Space Force officials that run the range at Cape Canaveral have forecast 87 space launches just from Cape Canaveral alone. The vast majority of those will be SpaceX. Some of the additional SpaceX missions to reach that 100 launch threshold that they're aiming for will be launched out of California and potentially out of South Texas if they are able to get the Starship rocket up to its orbital test flight in the coming months. So we'll leave you with one final look of Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. By all accounts, so far, a successful launch, a successful landing, also at the first stage booster. Just a few more payload deployment milestones to confirm. We'll have that information on spaceflightnow.com later today. So until next time, I'm Stephen Clark, reporting live on the launch of Transporter 6. We'll be back this weekend with more launch coverage for OneWeb 16. Until then, have a great week.